We're going to watch this video, and I'll pause and talk about it as we watch through, but this is a video called The Worst Lore in Modern Gaming by Lufa, or Luffa, and it is a 9-month-old video that I only just stumbled across that apparently just talks about how Siege is the worst lore, like, ever made, or has the worst lore ever made. If you want to go look it up, the channel, Luffa, L-U-F-A, not really showing up on screen. Worst lore in modern gaming. Let's see.
Lore and gaming go together hand in hand. There's something about having a good story or history tied to what you're playing that can make it infinitely more interesting. Good lore can elevate a game to a legendary status, whether it's given through detailed evidence that gets the player more immersed in the game's world, or through cryptic clues that add fuel to their imagination. If you already enjoy a game and find out it has good lore behind it, chances are you'll enjoy it even more. But bad lore can make you not want to play a game at all, with Hello Neighbor being the best example. A game that's lore and story was terribly written and conveyed, forever staining the reputation of a once fairly anticipated game. The gameplay was bad. I
didn't even know this game had lore.
Lore is not necessary for a game to be good. There have been dozens of titles with no lore that have been amazing, and no one's going to hate a game for not including it. However, if a game does choose to include lore in its experience, it must be done right. Otherwise, you're better off not including it at all. Like a supplement, lore can serve to elevate its game. But if it's not thought out well, it can quickly pull the title down and affect people's perception of it. With shooters, lore is often conveyed through campaigns and PvE game modes. Just because your game is mostly online doesn't mean it has to have a bad story. Some of the best examples of online shooters that have good lore include Halo, Call of Duty, TF2, and I think Destiny, before they deleted the campaign.
TF2 I want to throw in. Easily some of the best lore of any video game ever, and it's only online. They just completely made up some random story and threw it in there for a game that it has zero impact on, and I love it. And their videos always do well, like Meet the Spy, Meet the Soldier, all that stuff. Amazing lore. 10 out of 10.
I don't know. I don't think I'm qualified to speak on that game. But what I am qualified to speak on is Rainbow Six Siege, and the complete nosedive its story took many years ago. Some games have lore that's so good they are renowned for it. Rainbow Six Siege is not one of those games.
Very true.
If you were to ask the average Siege player what was happening in the game's story right now, they'd probably say that zombies are besieging Ba Sing Se or something. Most players are too distracted with the amazing gameplay to care about the game's current story. And I don't blame them. I love this game. I play
I want to throw in, he said, amazing gameplay.
more than I use my phone. What is my rank? Let's just say it rhymes with Whopper T. Most players are too distracted with Siege's gameplay to care about its story. But if they were to take a peek into the lore that the Rainbow writers have created, they would find out that they have been missing out on some of the most dumb and convoluted writing I have ever seen. This stuff is worse than my aim. To understand the start of Rainbow Six Siege's lore, it's helpful to know about the overall franchise's history. The first Rainbow Six title came out in 1998 based on the novel written by Tom Clancy. Tom Clancy was an author known for his technically detailed and suspenseful military books, and the first Rainbow game was made to coincide release with its book, with Rainbow's novel in the game being released during the same month.
I also just want to quickly throw in here while he talks about that lore. It's also important to know, I'm sure he'll maybe mention this, that Rainbow Six Siege was originally supposed to be a campaign-only video game called Rainbow Six Patriots that was supposed to have a very deep story about how terrorists were terrorizing the US and how the Rainbow Six Patriots were supposed to stop them. The fact that it went from that game to what we have now, and lore has just, obviously gone downhill. Not great. Not a great look.
So from the start, serious and tactical themes were written into this franchise's DNA, and for a while the game stayed that way, with each sequel that came out maintaining the gritty atmosphere the original had established. Themes of secrecy, high stakes, and advanced tactics were stapled to the games. And when Rainbow Six Siege was announced, it seemed bent on maintaining that identity,
the original
with its trailer impressing
fans
with what looked like to be another modern and realistic take on the FPS genre. And for a while, that was what we got. However, it didn't stay that way. When I first loaded up Rainbow onto my Xbox, I was already hyped. I had heard about the game's serious reputation. I knew that the characters all wore subtle and practical uniforms. The energy of the game, both online and off, was said to be nerve-wracking, and the opening cinematic confirmed my assumptions with a grave message. Aurelia Arnott, a United States official, was addressing the game's threat. A group by the name of the White Masks had started to release dangerous gas in public places.
And the reason why she no longer is in the game is because they couldn't afford her. So that's why they changed to Harry. She originally was supposed to stay on for all of the lore, I think, but then they were like, we can't afford her budget. So then they just scrapped her. Brought in Harry.
According to Aurelia, this group could show up anywhere in the world and were indiscriminate about who they targeted. And Rainbow, an international counter-scarerist group, would now be reactivated to stop them. This was the story that Rainbow debuted with on launch. The White Masks were Siege's first antagonist. They were a very realistic and terrifying threat, and the mysterious lore surrounding them fit the franchise's brand perfectly. A faceless group that was using modern tactics to cause as much fear and destruction as possible, with Aurelia stating that the group was both physically and psychologically dangerous. They didn't have any flair or standout characteristics, besides being serious about effectively carrying out their missions. And this was an amazing choice because it worked perfectly with the gameplay. You see, when Siege first launched, it debuted with several PvE missions called situations. While these were removed presumably to cut server costs, they were once a big deal for a lot of players, mostly due to how much of a thrill it was to play against the lore-accurate White Masks. On the player side, Siege's gameplay was already much more measured than other shooters. You had to plan where you would deploy and were encouraged to move at a calculated pace. Combine this with any sort of enemy and you would have a game feel that is already intense. But the amazing part was that the mysterious and intimidating lore surrounding Rainbow's enemies was reflected in their behavior. The White Masks acted just as ruthless as they had been hyped up to be, using all sorts of heartless tactics to stop you. They would throw stun grenades, gather up in groups to more effectively hunt you down, charge you with human creepers, or just stay stationary waiting for you to turn around the corner. You could hear them communicating and breathing heavily the moment before they snuck up on you. And of course, their most evil tactic would be to use human bait as well as their other signature threats. This was a great experience because the lore and gameplay were intertwined perfectly.
I feel like there might be a little bit of historic revisionism there. I don't believe that's true. Where he just said that like the AI had all these strategies and they would like team up to push you in groups. I don't think that's true. I think they just like had waves of spawns and like would all just push the same objective, but they wouldn't like all be on their own and then be like, we're gonna group up and go together, which is what he makes it sound like, but I don't know, I guess he could just mean they could spawn in waves.
Just as they always should be. It was extremely scary to face the White Masks, and oftentimes the only way to outsmart them was through communicating with your teammates and using clever tactics. On the multiplayer side, you could assume that every game you went into was practice against them. That was the basic lore, keeping everything tied together and immersive. And you could argue that being immersed in such a high-stakes scenario caused players to be more enthusiastic about engaging with the game the way it was intended. What I mean by that is more strategic and communicative gameplay, and less running into the sight like they're the main character. We see a lot of that today in Copper, where I may or may not live. Because the game respected itself, the community was at least encouraged to respect it too. But as the story started to conclude, the White Masks eventually got tired of being dunked on by Rainbow and planned one final attack. Titled Article 5, it was the last scenario of the PvE category.
Wait, was that the lore?
And the developers had made quite an impressive finale. The entire map was contaminated with gas, and as a player, your HUD represented a hazmat suit. It was a truly unique scenario. This would be the last hurrah for Rainbow's initial PvE experience, both gameplay and lore-wise, as the game would quickly take a much different direction. But not knowing this, many players were excited to see what kind of scenarios like this would come next. Unfortunately, we'd never get something like this campaign again. It's difficult to explain what exactly happened to the lore's direction after this. At first, the game's writers seemed to be taking a well-earned break, with the lore put on pause as developers focused on adding more operators. Several major updates were added to the game, building on its map and gameplay pool, specifically 8 of which were added before the game's lore was expanded outside of just introducing new characters. The 9th major update, Operation Chimera, would be the first to change things up, bringing with it the fan-favorite Outbreak event that brought new PvE gameplay. This provided additional lore to the game, albeit against a much less realistic threat. First of all, none of Outbreak is considered canon to the main game. It actually takes place in an alternate timeline, and none of it builds on the real world's lore. Second, going from a serious, the Batman Riddler type threat to mutated alien zombies is quite the jump. Nothing like this had ever been done in the Rainbow franchise's games or novels, and it was quite the experimental decision.
Which I feel
But
like is not a
despite it
bad
being less
thing.
traditional, I can say that this was a solid addition to Siege, both gameplay and lore-wise. The story was handled quite well, as it brought back Aurelia into the story, with Ash having to call her up to once again authorize Rainbow, as they were not allowed to enter the scene without clearance, keeping things surprisingly in line with the game's inspiration. As Tom Clancy once described it, the core idea of his books were operators who were highly skilled, disciplined, honest, thoroughly professional, and only lost their cool when incompetent politicians or bureaucrats got in their way. And Ash having to get permission from the government to approach a new threat very much maintains Clancy and the Rainbow franchise's original vision. From a gameplay perspective, it was also popular enough to get a spin-off game developed, releasing much later in the future. However, no matter how you feel about the Outbreak event, it was only a limited time event, and wasn't meant to stay around for long anyways. However, once it was over, things dramatically and horribly changed for the worst. Because from here on out, the lore is about to go from consistent to having a complete identity crisis. It is said that around 2020, the White
Which I also want to throw in here. Around this time was when Ubisoft started hiring more people to deal with the lore. Because for the first like 4 or 5 years, they never had like any lore updates for the game, just like in the in-game bios. Then I think it started in year 5. I remember for sure, like at least when 0 came out, they have an employee, or had maybe, I don't know if they're still there. Their full-time job at Ubisoft was to be the like Splinter Cell archivist for Rainbow Six Siege. His only job was just to study Splinter Cell and know the lore for Ubisoft and for Siege. And that was when Shadow Legacy came out, so year 5, season 3. So they actually had more people than ever working on lore. So the fact that this is where it started taking a nosedive is interesting.
Masks were defeated once and for all. Although a few of them were said to still be scattered across the world, their organization in the lore was considered dissolved. And with their story over, this is where the lore would go into a renaissance. A bad renaissance. It was said that having neutralized the White Masks, Aurelia moved on to be promoted to Secretary of State. And with this came a huge transfer of leadership as she handed over Rainbow to her colleague Harry. Now, if there's any way I can describe Harry, it's that he represented the new direction of Siege. And by that I mean, he was responsible for everything that went horribly wrong. The first thing he did was completely turn the program on its head by creating a concept for a massive sports arena, a location where the program would now mostly take place. Inside of this arena, the operators were now treated like celebrities, as the arena had been filled with thousands of fans? This was not just an arena for training, but was apparently also meant to entertain the masses, which is an interesting combination for such a confidential society to have. The operators were tasked with living in and fighting against each other in the arena, where they used BB guns and sim suits to play for points on a scoreboard, with a commentator included to hype up the fans.
Operators, this is match point. Only one defender remaining. 3 attackers remaining.
They were also interviewed and had talking heads like The Office, and the shift in tone had taken a complete 180.
Gustave Kateb, GIGN.
I didn't mind this, to be honest, but I get what he's saying. He's saying it's super different than what the game originally was. But I honestly didn't mind this part of it. The arena, I always thought was cool. The cinematics I thought were cool. Harry was kind of lame.
National Gendarmerie Intervention Group.
G'day.
Do I look at you or the camera?
Mike Baker, Special Air Service.
Seamus Calden, Sanitation.
So why would Rainbow, a covert organization that uses cutting-edge technology and secret national techniques, do this? Why would they go from focusing on a realistic threat to playing Airsoft Olympics? There is not a good explanation. It was bad writing done to cash in on esports. Here is the reasoning for the dramatic shift according to the lore. Harry had moved Rainbow to this stadium, one so that Rainbow could train for a wider range of real-world scenarios.
I honestly never thought about that this was specifically designed to be part of the lore to make esports in Siege make more sense and to be more exciting. I never really put 2 and 2 together. That makes sense, and I probably like thought that in the back of my head, but I never actually like processed that is what their main marketing intention was. I always just thought that they wanted it to have like life be reflected in the art, I guess is what it is essentially, but
by making them train in a paintball stadium. And 2, unite them as a team by also having them live together in it, and basically always work together in teams. This story direction doesn't work, and his plan fails horribly on both of these goals, and he dies. But that's not really Harry's fault as much as it is the writers. Think of Harry as like a scapegoat for the direction that Ubisoft wanted to move Rainbow towards. He's basically like a self-insert for the writers trying to put themselves inside the story so they can directly change what Siege is about. So what are the real developers' reasons for doing this? According to narrative director Alex Lima, the decision to phase out Siege's counter-scarist narrative was so that they could pursue a more comprehensive and scalable story. Apparently, making the game's lore revolve around Call of Duty Olympics achieves this. When it comes to making the story more comprehensive, I don't know about you, but soldiers fighting against real-world threats is a lot easier to grasp than soldiers competing in stadiums for points with live spectators. The whole thing feels impractical, and like the writers don't know which world this story takes place in. Why are there people watching this? Aren't all these operations using highly confidential technology? Don't they have identities to protect? Isn't this a bit of a risk? Alright everybody, I'm glad all of our best agents and 50,000 people could be here. This is gonna be a fun one. I packed some extra orange slices. Okay. The lore might be a little bit out there, but at least it accomplished its goal of being scalable. Rainbow is clearly just laying down the foundation for a story that will be built on for the rest of the game's lifespan. They wouldn't just go out with such a dramatic system if it wasn't scalable like they wanted it to be. As it turns out, it was not scalable, because just recently the writers killed off its mascot. So no more Wipeout, everybody. Sorry. How did this happen?
I didn't even think about that.
How
Are
did we
they
lose the Steve Jobs of gaming? Well, I'm happy to say it's a hilariously convoluted series of events. I'm talking Marvel Civil War levels of buildup, because the guy who did this is exactly like Baron Zemo. After starting their new program, Harry decided to hire Nighthaven, a similar organization to Rainbow, except for the fact that it uses more ruthless and risky tactics. Nighthaven and Rainbow actually have a lot of inherent conflicting worldviews. They do not like each other, and they do not do things the same. It's basically a ripoff of Talon from Overwatch. During their first tournament, because Rainbow does annual tournaments now, Ash, the leader of Rainbow, and Callie, the leader of Nighthaven, get put on the same team by Harry, because he knows that they don't like each other, so this should help. What a great idea, Harry. I hope this doesn't cause a butterfly effect that ironically leads to your own end. During a particularly critical round, Callie decides to use Ash and Dokkaebi as bait to secure the W. She also skids a shot through Ash's face, which is kind of concerning because why isn't Ash wearing a helmet if the supposed BB bullets can do this? What if someone accidentally hits a headshot on her? That seems like an incredible health and safety risk. After that kerfuffle, Ash is upset because of what Callie did, and she's brooding about it in the bathroom when she hears Callie lecturing the other operators about how in this line of work, you can't be worried about safety. And sometimes, you gotta bend the rules to secure the win. And Ash gets so mad that she storms into the other room and starts telling Callie off. She tells her that she doesn't know how they do it in Nighthaven, but here at Rainbow, you can't use people as bait. Callie tells her that it's just a game, which it is, and Ash punches her. The room then proceeded to break out into chaos as the operators split up into two sides of the room, literally picking sides. And by
I'm being nitpicky. Why does he say room like that? He says rum.
the next cinematic, Nighthaven decides to leave Rainbow,
American thing?
an incredibly short run. It's almost like they were only here so the Rainbow writers could use them to cook up conflict. So as you can see, the game's writers are really going heavy on the internal beef angle. They're basically just stirring up drama out of nowhere. Even Ella and Zofia, who for a long time coexisted as sisters, started to get more hostile towards each other, with the arena being fuel for their rivalry. They basically get retconned into always having hated each other, and Ella leaves Zofia behind to join Nighthaven along with a bunch of other operators. Then Callie lectures Ella about how she made the right choice.
He says that was retcon, but that wasn't. When Ella and Zofia came out, they specifically made their lore that they had, like, they didn't like each other and that they were always at ends. Because the whole thing was that Zofia was the child who, like, listened to their dad and, like, became a respected soldier, and then Ella was always the troubled child who didn't want to do that, and then they had conflict because of that. I don't think that was retcon. I think that was from the beginning. Maybe they got more angry at each other, but, like, they always hated each other. That's why they always had the sister rivalry thing. So I don't think that changed. Everything else I agree with so far, though.
Great job, Harry.
But they've
This
always hated
arena
each
has
other.
really done its job of bringing everybody together. You have really done some good team building. A true peacemaker. This sort of Civil War narrative has actually been done in quite a few other games before. Overwatch has always had a lot of this in its lore with the heroes not getting along. Apex Legends had some beef, and I think Valorant too, maybe. You can tell that they also moved the operators into the stadium so that they could have a good environment for these arguments. Because if they were still mostly
it's
focused
just like a
on
reality TV
actually
show.
stopping criminals, there wouldn't be any time for these petty differences. But now, because they're inside a safe environment, everyone can have fights without compromising any missions, which makes the Olympics direction even more ridiculous. But things get much worse. The introduction for Azami, a new operator, follows these events. And in her animated short, we get the lore that her boss, and I guess dear friend, was murked in front of her eyes. And she visits her friend Habana, who is still on Rainbow's side by this point, to show her that the bullets used were labeled Nighthaven property. So rather than jump to conclusions, the Rainbow folks track down the mercenaries who killed Azami's boss to see if they can figure out who ordered them. But it turns out the mercenaries were bait, and a helicopter starts shooting at all the Rainbow operators. And they're
I do
all
not
like,
remember this
oh man,
comic.
I'm pretty sure this is the work of Nighthaven. We haven't gotten any more evidence since that bullet, but if this is Nighthaven, we're mad, so it might as well be Nighthaven. And so they decide to fully jump to conclusions by deciding to infiltrate Nighthaven's HQ. But
When the fuck did they release all those comics? I've never seen that lore before. But if that, I assume that is all real, because why would they lie about that? That is really bad writing.
Nock does a sloppy job escaping, Nighthaven finds out she was poking around their base and tracks her down. Nock was tracked down. The invisible stealth operator, the one whose only ability in Siege is being invisible on cameras, was caught on camera and then tracked down by bees. And so Grim from Nighthaven pays a visit to her and
To be fair, the
threatens
bees
her,
could track
and
her,
that's
but
actually all the retaliation that happens.
the camera
like,
thing
you
is
thought this
funny.
would launch a big conflict, but no, he just tells her, like, don't do it again or I'll come for you. And that's it. Rainbow just decides that it probably wasn't Nighthaven after all. Then Rainbow decides to go to Nighthaven again, but this time just to tell them to stay out of their business and give Solus a cool moment to shine. And then they realize both of their gear has been stolen this entire time because someone else has apparently been messing with both teams. So all of their conflict was pointless. This is horrible. But literally none of it matters because it turns out it was all a guy named Deimos. He had orchestrated everything all along. This guy then visits Harry, tries and fails to take out Rainbow operatives in front of him, and then tells Harry that old Rainbow was better and shoots him. Deimos is basically the Siege's community personified.
I did not know any of that lore, but now it all starts to make sense. I remember whenever any new season came out and that, like, the comic book cinematic thing would come out, I was like, man, this is so, like, it makes no sense. I don't understand what the fuck's going on, and I just hated it. I would always skip them because they were so bad. But now I'm understanding that if that's all the lore they have behind the scenes that I've never read, that's why it all makes no sense, and that's why it's so awful.
You know, Rainbow used to be feared in my time. A covert unit of apex killers. And you turned it into the escapades.
Everybody then tracks Deimos
Most
down and captures
realistic
him. So that
take.
is the lore with a lot of filler cut out, because as you can see, there's already just so much nonsense in it. They were clearly just making pointless storylines to draw out the lore, so they wouldn't have to worry about actually doing anything that had a big impact on the game. But the worst part is how the lore is not compatible with the game itself. First of all, if Nighthaven and Rainbow never really got along, how come they trained together in-game? You could explain this by saying that the game takes place at a time when the two forces were briefly in harmony before or after their conflict. But that doesn't explain Deimos being a playable character. We haven't got a lot of information about Deimos' plan. All that we know is that he thinks Rainbow is too soft and wants to kill all the operators. But now he plays alongside them in their games, whether it's in the Wipeout Stadium or anywhere else.
Okay, I don't mind that as much. I know that ruins the lore, but, like, could you imagine if they wouldn't let you play as an operator because they now left Rainbow? Like, that would just be lame. I would hate that if lore actually affected the game, because I feel like it's fine to have lore for a multiplayer game like this, but it doesn't affect the actual game. It still makes it bad lore, but I don't understand the complaint of being like, oh, now I can play as Deimos? Like, this sucks. It's like, it's an online game. I just want to be able to play as all the operators. I don't care who hates who or what. If it's bad lore, it's bad lore, but that shouldn't affect my ability to play.
He trains with his worst enemies. In his introduction video, the devs were like, yes, Deimos hates Rainbow, but he's not really a part of the team, guys. He's just agreeing to practice with them forever. Mocks Rainbow for being basically Airsoft. Becomes part of the Airsoft team. Oh, the irony. As you can see, the developer's decision to change Siege's narrative led to more problems than it solved. The lore was poorly strategized, as it led to the developers having trouble explaining why it doesn't line up with gameplay, and the pacing itself was also super disjointed.
I don't think they said
and
that
it feels
he
like it took
joined
years
them.
for anything to happen. The stadium
I can
basically
go back
acted
and
as
look
an
at it.
environment for these silly stories to play out, and then couldn't be scaled anymore and was scrapped. Had Rainbow continued in its original direction, not only would it have been more coherent, but the stakes would be higher and fans would be more engaged. There are plenty of directions you could go with real-world antagonists that would have actually lifted gameplay up too. A new group of scarers that target tech could make levels where you can't use anything electric, and more levels like Article 5 would challenge players in new and interesting ways. The writers could also have those same dramatic emotions they wanted to stir up with Nighthaven, but in a much more engaging way to audiences. Just make it so Ash is brooding because the new opposition is causing her to doubt Rainbow's capabilities. Something like that would not only be more interesting, but it would also tie in with the game, raising the stakes around the organization instead of making it a recreational Nerf club. Lore and story are a critical part of a community's engagement with a game, and fans had been begging to return to Siege's more serious narrative ever since it was abandoned. The problem is, going back to a more serious threat would mean that Ubisoft would have to spend resources on making more single-player gameplay. We don't want to do that, dude. That would take money. We're more interested in appealing to esports, and cutting costs by removing all traces of PvE gameplay while we're at it. Although, ask any esports player what they think of Stadium, and they'll probably tell you it's their least favorite map. It's not even in the ranked map pool. I really don't have any high expectations for this game's story, because clearly the narrative department of Siege has no idea what they're doing. Of course, in a game like Rainbow, lore is not the final say in a game's success at all. This game is doing very well, and it clearly didn't need its half-baked world building to do so. But judging it strictly from a writing perspective, this game's lore and overall story is a failure. It's not well written or interesting, and worst of all, it doesn't stay true to the game itself. I have no idea where the story is going to go from here. I'm predicting Deimos will escape from Rainbow and just wreak havoc for 3 years while still being a playable character in-game. They're gonna probably chase him around for 2 years before making him take over Nighthaven or something. If you like this video, make sure to plant the diffuser on the like button or team kill it. I don't care, just interact with it. Thanks for watching. I'm Lufa.
Lufa, that's how you pronounce his name. So, I'll say for the most part I agree with most of what he said. The lore is awful. I don't agree with the whole, especially what he said about Deimos, that oh, he hates them, but now he's playing alongside them. Who the fuck cares? I just want to play as Deimos. I don't care if he hates them. I don't care if they're literally killing each other. Because, we've seen in some cinematics where it looks like some operators die. Imagine if an operator dies in a cinematic and then you can just never play them again. They're just gone from the game. That would be boring. That's also why, I don't know how many of you guys know this, Operation Chimera, where we had Finka and Lion come out, originally Finka and Lion were supposed to only be operators for Outbreak. And then once Outbreak was gone, Finka and Lion would be gone from the game. They were not multiplayer, PvP operators. They were meant only for that event. And then, I think it was just a few months before, they were we might as well release them, we have them. This is a waste to just get rid of them. So they kept them in the game, which is why Finka and Lion were both ridiculously broken at launch. They were way too strong, because they were meant for PvE. So imagine if they had released those operators and then removed them after the event was over. That would have just been lame. So I'll go full screen for the rest of it. Yeah, so I don't think having lore direct how the gameplay works is a good idea. I do agree that the lore is just messy, though. I didn't know about all those comics and all the terrible writing they did. The fact that it was just it was Nighthaven. Maybe it wasn't Nighthaven. No, it was Nighthaven, and then they just warn each other instead of doing anything about it. All fucking stupid. I do think that if they had kept with the white masks, it probably would have been way better. I think having just one group of people that you can fight against and keeping them in the game would have been great. But I know there's so many issues with Siege's code. I don't think a lot of this is on the writer department. I do think a little bit is on the dev department because of limitations in the game. I can say that certain parts of the game had to be removed because of limitations with technology and new stuff coming in, and that they would interact and break each other, so they had to remove old stuff. It doesn't have to do with the writing. A lot of people think the writers just chose, hey, we want to remove the white mask, so they removed it. No, that was not the writer's choice. That was a dev choice. Usually having to do with different modes being introduced and stuff. So I think the writers are probably doing what they can to keep it try to keep it consistent because of what the devs keep changing. But I think it's both. the writers aren't doing a good job, but the devs also have to change things, which then the writers now have to retcon or change or whatever. So it's just a big mess. I can't say I disagree with much in the video. It is, the lore is bad. That's why I've never cared about it. Other people care a lot about it though. Like I remember when we were at SI and Harry got shot in the cinematic, like people gasped. Cross was like in dismay. He's like, Harry? I'm like, who the fuck? I was like, Harry is like the worst character in the entire thing. Fuck him. Who cares? But I've always been an anti-lore person. I just don't care about lore. It's a PvP game. Why the fuck would I care? Overall, good video though. Very well put together. Definitely like skipped over a few things, but he even said that at the end. He's like, I jumped between different things because there's so much just useless stuff in there, but still overall very well done.